What is it about Africa? Some see struggle. We see opportunity. This is where we thrive. Africa is a land of contrasts. Hundreds of millions of our people live without access to clean water and electricity. Yet we have more entrepreneurs than any other continent, and by 2050, half of the world's youth will be African. Africa's been busy. We're urbanizing, embracing technology. We're sprinting forward with some of the fastest growing economies in the world. It's time for African-driven solutions to African problems. It's time to seize the moment and create our own narrative to build the Africa we want. Business has the power to bring about change at scale and make money doing so. The shared value business model reconnects business success with social progress. Shared value is also about partnerships, building business networks that create inclusive growth. The power of collaboration should never be underestimated. If we can bring together businesses and communities from across Africa with a shared purpose, we can build economic value and, most importantly, value for society. It's time for Africa to become the economic powerhouse of the future. Become part of Africa's most powerful shared value business network. Join the Shared Value Africa initiative today.
My name is Sima Rashimiro. You can call me Sima.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to be speaking here today.
screen, so you never know, you could be the next big trender. I think it's even a show called that. And then before we begin, we will be using a tool, a polling tool called Mentimeter, when asking questions or doing polls throughout the summit. And we would like to do a practice run just now. So for those who are in the room, for those joining us at home or in the office, you could scan the QR code provided on the screen, or you could go to www.menti.com, and then you will be prompted to enter a code. And the code is the one that you see displayed on your screen, 20380167. 20380167. And tell us where you're from. Where are you joining from? Is it South Africa? Is it Kenya? We really want to see the East Africans in the room, but we are all about unity, so we're going to get to regional. But do share where you're from and get familiar with the tool, because it will be very crucial for us as we embark on the discussion. So we do have
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to be speaking here today. I first attended the Africa Shared Value Leadership Summit in 2017 when I was a member of the Shared Value Africa Initiative Steering Committee. And since then, I've keenly followed the growth and the deepening of the discourse on shared value as a key business proposition. It's an honor to speak to you here today from my new role where I lead the world's largest private sector sustainability initiative, the United Nations Global Compact. I assumed my position as Executive Director and CEO during the height of the coronavirus pandemic in June 2020, and I accepted the call to leadership with a profound awareness of the magnitude of the task at hand. Several of the SDG targets had already begun to roll back, and the demand for urgent action to reignite action towards the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development could not have been more relevant for the private sector. Indeed, in a world buckling under the weight of the COVID pandemic, it took an unprecedented yet organic collaboration between the private and public sectors around the world to unleash a rapid response to the unfolding health crisis. That lesson must be retained and guarded going forward. Business leaders must accept this call to joint responsibility. We all have a stake in this fight. As an African woman, I'm proud to see Africa shaping conversations inside and beyond the continent on how to lead businesses towards sustainability and corporate responsibility. Africa is a resource-rich, youthful, geographically vast, and politically diverse continent with expanding economies, robust private sectors and markets, growing wealth and capital, and improving governance and institutions. Recognizing these strengths means that we can approach business leadership from a position of strength and pride. Africa's diversity of cultures calls for us to bring forth our Ubuntu, our best principles of collective action. It calls for us to share our indigenous knowledge and to marshal our best abilities. We must do so in a way that connects our leadership outcomes with the hopes of our peoples and the demands of our green planet. Hopes for unity, self-determination, freedom, progress, and collective prosperity as espoused in our Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. However, we are operating in challenging times, not only because global development has been interrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic and the resultant economic crisis, but also because Africa continues to face challenges that fuel the global inequality of African economies and endemic poverty of our people. These challenges are related to infrastructure reach, access to finance, largely informal markets, and unfettered global competition. The global community celebrates Africa as a market for raw materials and an upcoming consumer market. We must recognize this aspect of exploitation and its influence that allows Africa's economic development to lag behind the rest of the world. African businesses will not survive this risk if they act unilaterally. It'll take a united front amongst business leaders to claim the space needed to compete fairly in Africa and in the global arena. To support the longevity of African businesses, we must adopt foresight in mitigating and eliminating risks, both internally and externally. De-risking means demanding fair and real participation in global spaces. De-risking requires supportive national, regional, and international governance institutions to drive equitable policy. De-risking calls for accountability, anti-corruption, and reduction of waste, and for businesses to make real investments in the communities they serve. This includes value chains as well as internal and external stakeholders. Profit must be driven by purpose. Indeed, purpose-driven profit is the only way to ensure that no one is left behind. Businesses cannot thrive in a failing world. They cannot thrive when our politics fail, when conflicts mushroom, and when states flounder. Today, consumers are voting with their money and demanding more accountability from corporations to promote sustainability. And a new generation of talented and socially conscious workers are voting with their feet and flocking to employers who embrace these principles and values. Ladies and gentlemen, the embrace of principle-based sustainability action not only serves to meet customer demands, it fosters greater innovation and opens up new business opportunities. These and other measures cannot be carried out unilaterally by the private sector. The Sustainable Development Goals recognize this challenge, the fallacy and risk of unilateral action. SDG 17 is precisely the call to action for partnerships for the global goals that the Global Compact espouses. The principle of collaboration and of profit with purpose is also enshrined in the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. Connecting 1.3 billion people across 55 countries, it is the largest free trade area in the world. It also represents a major opportunity for African countries to collaborate to drive intra-Africa trade, bring 30 million people out of poverty, boost growth, broaden economic inclusion. Its implementation will help usher in the kinds of reforms necessary to trigger sustainable economic growth. And as companies align their business operations with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, they can also use the COVID-19 crisis to transform themselves and place sustainability at the core of their businesses. The challenges faced today, fragile trade networks and broken supply chains, declining trust and growing inequalities, and weakening international cooperation and social cohesion, offer an immense opportunity for businesses to reinvent themselves and transform their supply chains into engines for sustainable development. To support forward movement, the mandate of the Africa Shared Value Initiative is to advocate, create awareness, motivate, and lobby for business thinking and implementation to shift from a profit-only focus to profit with purpose. Ladies and gentlemen, the UN Global Compact shares a similar vision, a vision to inspire and mobilize a global movement of companies and private sector stakeholders committed to sustainability and responsibility. For over 20 years, Global Compact participants and signatories, currently numbering over 13,000, have benefited from aligning their strategies and operations with the Global Compact's 10 principles. The principles relate to human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption. In so doing, the private sector has also advanced broader societal goals, contributing to the Sustainable Development Goals. The 10 principles represent the shared values that businesses commit to when they join the Global Compact. These values are based on universally accepted principles that United Nations member states have endorsed. As Global Compact participants, businesses are called upon to adopt human rights principles, adhering to international human rights standards, and ensuring that they are not complicit in any abuses within their organization or supply chains. Labor principles call for just labor practices, elimination of child labor, recognition of the freedom of workers to associate, and non-discrimination. The principles challenge businesses to promote environmental responsibility and support the development and diffusion of environmentally friendly technologies. Global Compact partners are also called upon to work against corruption in all its forms, including extortion and bribery. By incorporating the Global Compact's 10 principles into strategies and establishing a culture of integrity, our business partners not only uphold their basic responsibilities to people and planet, but they also set the stage for long-term success. I am proud that the Shared Value Africa Initiative member companies are also participating in the Global Compact. Among them, I recognize SAPI from South Africa, ABSA Group, Lafarge Africa, Enel, Nedbank, Old Mutual, and Vodacom, and my former employer, Safaricom in Kenya. Shared Value Africa Initiative's goal of building Africa's most impactful business network resonates with the Global Compact's newly launched Africa strategy for 2021 to 23, which is entitled Mobilizing African Businesses for Impact. The strategy was launched in September 2021 during the high-level opening week of the UN General Assembly. It tailors the mission of the Global Compact to the reality of the business landscape in Africa. Globally, our ambition is to accelerate and scale the global collective impact of business by upholding the 10 principles and delivering the SDGs through accountable companies and ecosystems that enable change. To define the direction of our Africa strategy, we engaged a multitude of stakeholders. To define the direction of our Africa strategy, we engaged a multitude of stakeholders on the continent, including some members of the Shared Value Africa Initiative. Unanimously, they emphasized the central role that partnerships play in ensuring the success of business sustainability in Africa. These objectives, 3 objectives, shall guide our work in Africa to 2023. focus, inclusion, and leveraging influential drivers of sustainability. We will focus on the issues and programs that are most relevant to African companies and encourage leading Pan-African and national companies to use their strengths to drive sustainability action through their value chains. And we will push for a broad, equitable geographic reach among our local networks. Driving inclusive impact in Africa means that we must gain support among all companies, including SMEs, wherever they are on their sustainability journey. Regardless of their business sectors or where they are in Africa, we can only succeed if we work together. Tailored programs for Africa call us to align our work with 5 core SDGs, and these include gender equality, decent work and economic growth, climate action, peace, justice, and strong institutions, and partnerships for the goals. Success towards these goals will in turn support other SDGs, including those related to eradicating poverty and hunger. The Global Compact is present with local networks in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Egypt, Ghana, Kenya, Mauritius and Indian Ocean, Morocco, Nigeria, South Africa, Tanzania, and Tunisia, counting over 650 participants and signatories across the continent. To scale impact, we aim to grow our presence further on the continent with initial expansion in Algeria, Angola, Botswana, Congo-Brazzaville, Côte d'Ivoire, Ethiopia, Rwanda, Senegal, and Uganda. Ladies and gentlemen, in closing, I want to emphasize how closely our goals of the UN Global Compact are aligned with those of the Shared Value Africa Initiative. We are with you on this journey to build vibrant, resilient African economies. Together, through collaborative, coordinated action, we will achieve the Africa we want. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanda, for that video. And I think I'm certainly for driving profit with purpose in that we create economic and social value. I think as a continent, we need to define what the next generations of our society is going to look like, what our planet is going to look like, the opportunities that our youths are going to see going forward into the future. And I believe it starts now. I'd like to, I know that my colleague Mumbi is a big fan of Sanda, and she's itching to take the mic away from me, so I'll be the bigger person in the room. Over to you, Maria.
Thanks, Simba. And of course, I have to comment on Sanda's video. She's somebody who we back home truly admire. I think what stood out for me in her speech is just this idea of partnership and COVID-19 being a test case of that. The coming together of the private sector, of government, of academics, delivering solutions very quickly. I think this is how we have to look at it moving forward. I'm an academic at heart. We call it triple helix model. So I find it very timely that she brought it up in her address to us today. I think it's also about leadership and bringing that back to business again, not just being passive about the well-being of our communities. And sometimes I feel as if we tend to think of these ideas as if they may be new, shared value, just because perhaps Professor Porter and Professor Kramer talked about it. But if we look at our own cultures, our own communities, these ideas are ancient. They were practiced by our ancestors. And whether we're in South Africa and we call it Ubuntuism, or a more refined or modern version of the idea called Afri-capitalism, I think it's really about thinking of business prosperity being inextricably linked to the well-being of the surrounding community. I'd also like to thank Satsini for introducing Sanda. And again, also we truly admire all the work that you have been doing with ABSA and other organizations. So with that, because I can go on forever, I would like to invite the next guest and the next panel discussion, Fifi Peters, who is also an amazing award-winning financial journalist who specializes in African and global financial markets. She's an anchor at CNBC Africa, I think one of the most well-known media houses in Africa. So Fifi, I welcome you to the stage. We're really looking forward to the discussion. Thank you, Fifi.
All right, thanks, Mumbi.
Thanks, Fifi.
So good morning to everyone in the room, and of course, good morning to the virtual audience. I don't know about everyone here, but I'm pretty excited to actually be presenting before people that I can actually see. It's the first time in 2 years I host a fireside chat before people I can actually see, so I'm quite excited to be with you this morning. So we're here to discuss a policy instrument that can either make or break this continent. And I'd like for us to approach this discussion from a very personal level, a personal experience of what you have had or have seen regarding the Africa Free Trade Area deals so far. I think that all of us in this room are well aware of the benefits of the AFCFTA, so I'm not going to go into them. We heard a little bit from our keynote speaker regarding the benefits. But I'd like to share my personal experience of what I have seen since the AFCFTA came into effect in January this year. Personal experience. And it is through the eyes of being a journalist and watching the moves of some of the biggest companies in Africa who are listed on the biggest stock exchange on the continent. And judging from their responses so far, it has been quite questionable what they think of the AFCFTA. So I know that we might say that it is still early days yet, which is fair. And I know that we also might say that COVID happened, which is also fair. But in my humble opinion, I feel as though COVID-19 is a short-term risk. Touch wood. We don't get a new variant in 2022 that follows us for another year. But it is a risk, hopefully, that is being smoothed out the system, particularly with the increasing levels of vaccination. Of course, that can increase a lot more, but nonetheless. I've seen companies making long-term decisions, however, about their views on the continent. And many of these companies have decided to pack their bags and come home, long term. And so this raises quite a number of questions around the AFCFTA and its ability to boost trade on the continent and its ability to unify the continent. And so this is the question that I hope that we can all tackle throughout this discussion today, and that you, even as the virtual audience, can comment and share your thoughts on. As I did say, I'm not the expert, so I'm going to introduce you to the experts who will help lead this discussion for us. Beginning with Dr. Thawela Nyendrajeri, who is the head of Economic Integration Division at the African Union Development Agency. The division spearheads flagship programs and implementation frameworks that advance regional integration in line with the aspirations of the African Union's Agenda 2063. Welcome, Dr. Thawela. Kindly take your seat. I think we've forgotten protocol of, of conferencing. The virtual audience can feel free to extend their applause as well. I think there is a feature on most of the virtual apps. Nonetheless, we also have Mr. Kibo Gena, who is the Executive Director of the Pan-African Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And in this role, thank you, sir. And in this role, Mr. Gena oversees a unique organization representing the interests of business and trade associations on the continent. Good morning and welcome to you both.
Thank you.
So before we kick off the discussion for this morning, I'd like for us to take a brief look at this introductory video on the exact subject matter.
Introducing JAMI, empowering African entrepreneurs. Africa faces a huge challenge with no centralized information on trade development, trade facilitation, trade finance, and trade negotiations makes accessing information on production processes in different sectors in different countries, making it virtually impossible to source. Africa's population has hit 1.4 billion people, making it the largest free trade area in the world. The AFCFTA connects 1.3 billion people across 55 countries with a combined GDP of $3.4 trillion. By 2050, Africa's youth population is projected to reach 460 million people, 6 times the size of the youth population of Europe. 91% of businesses in South Africa are SMEs, contributing 60% of employment and 52% of total GDP. Did you know that 48% of Nigeria's national GDP is contributed by SMEs? These account for 96% of businesses and 84% of employment. The solution is JAMI, the trade directory for African entrepreneurs. JAMI will contribute to Africa's economic growth, access to previously untapped markets for African entrepreneurs, marketing opportunities to grow your business and its network, compiling big data and insights from one of the world's biggest markets, while doing good and providing social impact investment. Current industries identified for inclusion on JAMI: agriculture, forestry, mining, healthcare, education, life sciences, retail, e-commerce, and many, many more. JAMI is currently looking for impact funding. Please contact Shared Value Africa Initiative at the following contact details.
Right. It would be interesting to hear what all of you do think of the JAMI initiative, this directory one-stop shop for entrepreneurs to engage with investors and companies and the like in terms of boosting the impact of the AFCFTA. Feel free to pass your comments to the virtual audience. The same applies. But perhaps we just start the discussion. I know it's the first time that we were all looking at that video, but Dr. Thawele, just any views on the initiative and its potential impact?
Thank you very much, Fifi, and good morning again to everyone in the room and to the participants online as well. So I think it's a very pertinent initiative. I think it's one that's timely. I think that there will be many more JAMIs to come because clearly one JAMI will not solve the solution for everybody, but I think it's a very good start. And I think it's setting us on the right path in terms of recognizing and acknowledging the fact that, number one, we need access to information and data. We need that to be readily accessible and available to our various entrepreneurs and businesses in order for them to understand where the opportunities lie, but also in order for us to understand what are the challenges that they're facing and how do we then unlock and solve those challenges and bottlenecks.
All right. Mr. Gena, sir, just brief views on JAMI from you?
Thank you also for having me. I think I would say we had to start somewhere on this issue. We have been talking about integration since the early 80s, and it seems like we've hardly found the instrument actually to bring in that integration. And perhaps this is a way to bring Africa actually together. But it is not an easy journey. I think one has to recognize that it's a process. It's a process that started actually from the up and has to go down to the bottom actually, and the bottom maybe has to raise up actually, up. But in any case, I just want to say that this is something that all Africans are very much keen to see success in this area. And I think African leaders also have shown commitment actually to make this happen, and then we have to walk the talk.
Right. So let's talk about how much walking we have done so far since January, and talk about what kind of integration we have seen so far since January. And Dr. Thawele, perhaps you lead us here because we're coming towards the end of the year and the first anniversary of the AFCFTA coming into place. What progress has been made so far in your view, ma'am?
Okay. So maybe let me start also just by acknowledging I think the theme that's bringing us all together here. You know, One Africa, One Voice. I think very pertinent, very relevant, and also having this discussion about the AFCFTA, intra-African trade issues around regional integration as well. So before I respond to your direct question about the progress and what we have done since the start of official trading under the AFCFTA, maybe just to contextualize for the audience where we are coming from as the African Union Development Agency. Our mandate is to promote and support and coordinate the implementation of priority programs and projects in line with Agenda 2063. And so the AFCFTA clearly is one of the flagship priorities of Agenda 2063, so it does fall within our mandate in terms of how do we support member states in terms of the implementation of the various activities, programs, initiatives that would help us to attain the objectives of the AFCFTA. I think it's important to underscore the fact that the AFCFTA Secretariat, which is a sister organization to ourselves, all of us falling under the ambit of the African Union in Addis Ababa, has been established, and it has already embarked on a number of initiatives in terms of trying to drive the agenda forward. So we know that there is the Trade Observatory that they have established, which is helping to connect entrepreneurs, MSMEs, to trade information, but also to understanding how they can actually bring their products to market. Issues relating to non-tariff barriers are also being addressed. There's an online monitoring tool that has been established that would allow people to actually report on challenges that they are facing with cross-border trade. This is very important, I think, especially when we're talking about your MSMEs and your informal traders who form a significant part of our economy. I think we saw some of the statistics in terms of the contribution of MSMEs to the economies. So it's very important that we're able to capture the challenges that are being faced at that level. The issue, I think, is going to be one of awareness. How do we make sure people are aware that this tool exists, that when they're crossing the borders and they're experiencing delays, whether it's due to the customs processing or because they are being asked to meet certain requirements, perhaps, which they cannot meet, how do they convey that information to the people that should then help them to resolve that? So that tool exists, but we need to make it known, and we need to start using it so that we can actually see the change in terms of being able to move quickly and easily across the borders. Most recently, Afreximbank has also, together in collaboration with the AFCFTA Secretariat, launched a payment settlement system that's also meant to support the settlement of payments for cross-border e-commerce, and especially targeting the constraints that MSMEs and MSMEs also face. So those are some of the things that are happening, I think, at the level of the AFCFTA Secretariat. From our side as AUD and NEPAD, there are a number of things that we are doing. The issue of MSMEs is very close to our hearts, so we have an initiative called the 100,000 MSMEs. And what that does is that it looks at the peculiar challenges that MSMEs are facing. So we look at capacity development, we look at access to finance and access to opportunities through access to markets and trade, as well as procurement opportunities. We also have a number of initiatives that are looking at how do we actually engender a culture of innovation and responsiveness in terms of African solutions to African problems. So we have the Homegrown Solutions, which is a business accelerator program. We've done certain things in terms of the Continental Business Network, just trying to also support MSMEs in terms of how they can be more responsive to the needs of the continent. Lastly, I think when we start talking about issues around integration, we are very concerned, obviously, with the infrastructure, because we understand very much that the infrastructure is what is going to drive our regional integration, and it's also a prerequisite and a very necessary element if we are going to start talking about trading across borders. So in that regard...
lots of initiatives on the go, some progress made, but quite a number of challenges still remain. And if I can just cut in there and just to get Mr. Gena's or Kiba's view, help us understand the Pan-African Chamber of Commerce's and Industries involvement in the AFCFTA, sir. And as you do, also feel free to reflect on the theme of this year's summit being One Africa, One Voice.
Yes. The Pan-African Chamber of Commerce and Industry was established, perhaps I should start when it was established in 2009, and started actually operation in 2013. So it's been in this business for the last 8, 9 years now. So, yeah. So the idea was really, first of all, at the continental level, it's to bring the voice of the business to entities like the heads of state at the African Union or any other forums where trade would be the main discussion areas. And so in that format, it is really to bring to policymakers what businesses are seeking, what businesses are finding challenging, and the opportunities that need to be somewhat supported. So this is one. Secondly, I think it's also to bring the African business people together and networking, actually, because I think business at the continental level has to be somewhat networked. This is a competition world, and in a way we don't have really to forget about it. And in competition, you always have winners and losers. But the whole idea is really not to have losers in this area. It is really to see how we can support each other, how we can build solidarity actually to make this CFTA, this agreement actually work. Because otherwise, if we sort of let the whole thing to the market, we will only see out of the 54 countries, just a few countries benefiting and all the others actually looking outside from the inside. So that is one way actually of helping businesses actually to come and interact with each other and support each other. The other area that we are focusing on is to see how is it that we can help actually businesses uplift their productive capacity, because I think one has to distinguish between the CFTA, the agreement, and then the agreement without really products to bring to the market or services to bring to the market doesn't mean much in any case. So I think how can we help? Dr. Tawala mentioned about infrastructure, and we have quite a few infrastructure, some of them soft, some of them hard, logistics, transport, finance, information, policy issues. These are issues that need to be somewhat brought to the table and find solutions. Particularly when we talk about small and medium enterprises, today, particularly since 2008, and I don't know whether I should say fortunately, actually, it has brought a new type of world. In a sense, it has brought us closer through technology, actually, and what was once a small or micro enterprise today can remain small, micro, but still global. And so that is also a new phenomena, actually. Right. And we need really to help businesses, particularly in the continent where we've seen actually the figures, around 90+% are small and medium enterprises. And we need really to sort of take this technology, and we've seen it in many other parts of Africa, actually, in terms of access to telecom, usage of telecom. There's a lot of progress. This is a continent of the future. And I think the whole idea of the Pan-African Chamber is to make this thing work without really sort of understanding that this is not really an easy task to do.
Certainly, and I think that that's the aim of everyone who is Team AFCFTA, right? To make it work and to make it realize the benefits for all. But again, I want to start at my opening question in terms of progress. And I'm asking it based on the fact that I've seen big companies turn away from this. Not all big companies, but too many to ignore. And therefore, within your respective roles, I'd like for you perhaps maybe to score the progress that has been achieved so far, underlying perhaps some of the challenges that have impeded on progress being better. So Dr. Tawela, out of 1 to 10, or on a score of 1 to 10, how would you rate the progress since January?
Interesting question, and one that I would maybe not answer directly in terms of attributing a score. I think that one has to acknowledge the fact that perhaps we have not made as much progress as one would have expected. But I think you also have to then look at a number of different factors that may be contributing to that. We sort of, and it does sound a little bit like we keep blaming COVID for everything, but we can't deny the fact that COVID has had an impact, has had something to do with progress on a number of things. So I think from my perspective, what I would see is that there's a lot going on. Perhaps a lot of it is not surfacing in the way that it should be surfacing. I think that one also has to be a little bit careful in the sense of, you know, and I hear you when you talk about the big players that are sort of skittish and maybe just sort of watching and observing on the margins and on the sidelines. But then the question we also have to ask ourselves is, what about everybody else? You know, what about the MSMEs? What about the informal traders? What about those people that need the capacitating, the nurturing for them to take advantage of this AFCFTA? I think the statistics have shown that in a lot of our economies, we cannot ignore the SMEs. We cannot ignore the MSMEs. We cannot ignore the informal sector. So maybe there's a bit of soul searching that we also need to do in terms of saying, where are we putting the energy and where are the expectations in terms of the benefits of this AFCFTA? Clearly, when you look at statistics that talk about different dimensions as far as our regional and economic integration, we're not doing that well for a number of reasons. Number one is the infrastructure. We still have a lot of challenges in terms of our connectivity across the continent, be it connectivity in terms of transport, communications, etc. So those are things that still need to be looked at and worked on. We have challenges in terms of connecting where production happens to where markets exist, but we also have a fundamental problem, which I think he alluded to, of productive capacity, and how do we actually stimulate that productive capacity, and how do we actually create regional and continental value chains so that we are able through that to sort of stimulate productive capacity and then therefore take advantage of this AFCFTA.
Okay, Kibo, how are your members thinking about solving for that solution of productive capacity, but also even the infrastructure gap? It's not a new one. We know, I forget how many billions of dollars we need to close that hole, but how are your members thinking about rising to that challenge?
Let me go back one step, actually, and I will try to touch upon, actually, the question that you asked,
Sure.
Dr. Tawela, particularly in terms of progress so far.
Feel free to put down a score. Dr. Tawela is being very kind.
The score. The score, there's no score, actually, to put at this stage.
0 out of 10, is that what
it
you're
hasn't,
saying?
No, we haven't yet started, actually. The whole thing is at this stage is really to put together the framework, the documents, trying to solve the technical issues. But mind you, trade is still going on, actually, in Africa without the CFTA. I mean, it's a choice whether you use the benefits of the CFTA, and if you think that the benefit of the CFTA is not really that important, you can still trade without the CFTA. But in any case, I think at this stage, we're not really far in terms of actually talking about the benefits of the CFTA at this stage. And from business perspective, I think we are far away in terms of even understanding what the CFTA is all about, particularly in many African countries where I sort of travel quite regularly, only in few countries, large companies perhaps actually, and as you said, some companies are not really yet they don't really see where the benefit lies at this stage. So they're still waiting actually how these things will sort of unfold. And small and medium enterprises, I think we need really to sort of calm down and explain and coach and encourage and incite actually on in bringing them to benefit from the CFTA. So that is really, in terms of score, I wouldn't put any score at this stage actually.
All right.
But the question that you raised, actually, the basic, I think one of the most important issue, and this is where the business people actually sort of feel, that tariff, yes, has to be reduced, but the problem for many businesses are outside tariffs. For example, customs, actually, how businesses transiting from one place to another solve the difficulties that they encounter into that journey. So that is one area that needs to be looked at in terms of working hours, in terms of harmonization of rules, in terms of transiting or movement of people. Because if you want to do business, you need also to let people move from one place to another. So there is a lot of issues that needs to be tackled with tariff. Tariff by its own is not going to change much, actually. In terms of infrastructure, basically we're talking about infrastructure between countries first, neighboring countries, and then we can talk about the Dakar, I think Dakar, Djibouti, or Cairo, Joburg, actually, in terms of infrastructure on road. These need to be financed actually by nations themselves or larger banks. Upping productive capacity requires education, requires of course finance, but requires also the capacity to market and the capacity to bring the products actually to the market. So there are a lot of actually activities that national chambers, national business and sector associations need to do to improve the capacity of businesses actually to lift up their business level.
Sure.
So let me stop here actually.
Yeah, because I want to also speak about COVID, and rightly so, it was a disruptor. But what we've also seen is because of the global supply chain disruptions that it has caused, in my humble view, I ask myself a question as to whether it has given African companies the opportunity or greater opportunity to trade with their African neighbors, right? Given the difficulty of getting goods from Europe, from the Americas, and the like. I know you'll mention the issue of capacity, perhaps, or the lack of, but to what degree has COVID perhaps been a tailwind for thinking about integrating our systems and our processes and our rail networks and just our continent a lot more, and to what degree, based on your viewings on the ground, have perhaps small companies or even larger companies taken advantage of this tailwind?
So you're right in the sense that, COVID has, I think, created opportunities in terms of, I think, new avenues, new products, new ways of connecting and trading across the continent. I mean, we saw, of course, in some instances where, countries that were able to produce PPEs, for instance, had that opportunity to export and market to other countries. I think it's important to, even in that context, underscore the fact that while we do have at the continental level programs that are speaking to cross-border infrastructure. So at the level of the African Union, we have the Program for Infrastructure Development in Africa that's looking at cross-border infrastructure. But these are not short-term projects. These are long-term projects that need significant amounts of money. You asked what is the total tag for Africa's infrastructure. At the moment, the current action plan, which is from 2021 to 2030, has a capex of about $160 billion that's required to actually bring those projects to bear. So indeed, the opportunities are there. The efforts are being made in terms of cross-border infrastructure, in terms of integrating and physically connecting, but more funds have to be put in terms of preparing these projects, bringing them to bankability, and making them work for Africa's people.
Sounds like a call for the private sector.
Definitely.
And in your response, how have they been rising to that challenge?
Private sector, I think, is coming to the party, but I think it also has to do with a little bit of how, from our perspective, supporting governments in terms of creating the conditions that enable private sector to comfortably invest. I think Sander talked a little bit about issues around risk management and how to mitigate some of the risks perhaps that might be perceived in terms of making investments into the continent. We are also very concerned with that, and we are also very concerned in terms of, number one, demystifying the risk perceptions, but at the same time working with the relevant financial institutions to put in place guarantee mechanisms and de-risking of cross-border infrastructure projects. I think lastly, maybe what I would want to perhaps emphasize is the fact that we have a lot of last mile issues at the borders, even in terms of infrastructure connectivity and in terms of access to services. So I think we need to think, even as we're talking about the build out of this huge infrastructure, I think we have to also think about that localized infrastructure across the borders. And we also have to think about how we make the connection between this regional infrastructure and national infrastructure as well.
All right. I mean, one can't ignore the logos of some of the financial institutions that are supporting this program. So it also speaks to the fact that they are aware of their importance, perhaps in making this free trade area deal work a lot better. But with that said, they need to make sure that they manage the risk adequately on behalf of their business, right, to stay afloat. And therefore, Kibo, if you can just maybe unpack a little bit further for us, what are some of those conditions that you think could make it a lot more easier for some of your members to feel comfortable to invest? Obviously, now you're speaking to policymakers here, but where are the areas of improvement that they can tweak that policy to make capital feel more at home?
I think the number one issue is bringing business into the debate, actually. Even if we are facing these challenges with COVID, I think the business community, as an important sector for the economy, has to be brought up and try to work out solutions. Actually, one of the issues that was raised earlier now was that Dr. Taola was, for example, the issue at the border. You have a truck coming from, let's say, Kenya to, this is just a hypothetical sort of example, from Kenya to Ethiopia. Then they have to stop at the border, you have to take the test, then another driver would come. That might take 2 days, sometimes maybe 15 days. Is there a better way of doing it? I think this has to be discussed actually with business. There are quite a few issues like that where, because of the absence of discussion, decisions have been taken which in a way has negative impact on businesses. Now, the other issue that businesses actually have again benefited from this issue is they had to rethink the model of their business. Actually, in many instances, this is not really an easy thing to do. But in most small and medium enterprises, I think we've seen a shift actually in how to put up a new process to either develop or to either improve or expand their businesses. And that again, is an initiative of the private sector, but it needs also the support of the government in terms of sometimes requiring some financial support,
Sure.
or sometimes requiring some changes or regulation sort of changes in those areas. What I want to say, actually, as a businessman myself, and also as a member, a leader of this community, I think we need really to bring business and government much closer to discuss and also to plan together on such important issues that affects not only businesses and the economy, but the entire continent.
Right. Got it. So both of you raised the issue of awareness, or perhaps the lack of awareness around the Africa Free Trade Area deal. And it's quite interesting because we have a poll question on this matter exactly, which would like to invite the audience to participate in, as well as the virtual audience who are tuned in online. So how you interact and how you answer this question is really simple. Just from your browser, whether it is your laptop or your cell phone, open up www.menti.com. And then when you do that, you will be prompted to input a code. And so the code that you need to input is, wow, I have been blinded by the lights here.
2038.
There you go, 2038 0167. So that's 2038 0167. And then you'll see the poll question on Menti, and it is asking about your understanding of the AFCFTA presently. Please engage, and we will comment on the results of the question in just a short while. But we are running out of time for this discussion, and perhaps let's try wrap it up. So my colleague in the industry, in the media industry here in South Africa, a very respected economic mind who you will be seeing and hearing from in just a moment after this panel, Ayabonga Kawe, has a view on this. And his view that he shared with me yesterday when we were preparing for this is the issue of the lack of currency harmonization, and the degree to which this could be an impediment for really getting the AFCFTA off the ground. The forex risks as a result of different valuations of different currencies, and therefore the idea that we need one currency to facilitate this trade deal. I'd like to get your thoughts on that, Dr. Thawela.
It's an interesting point, and I think it's something that, at the level of the African Union, in terms of the African Economic Community, I think that is one of the aspirations. But then the question we have to ask ourselves is, how long will it take us to get there? And therefore, in the meantime, and as we work towards that, what should we be doing? I feel that as relevant as that might be, perhaps that's not the most important and pressing thing at the moment. That would be my personal perspective. I think it's more about really getting people to understand what the AFCFTA is, and very much at the local level, because I think the awareness levels perhaps at the higher levels might be better and more than at the local levels. But everybody needs to understand at my level and at your level and at the level of the people that we work with, what does it mean for them? Why should they care? And how do they get involved? And without that understanding, without that buy-in, I think it then becomes very difficult to sell the idea and to make things work.
All right. What's your view as a businessman? Because we're talking about
Tough
this.
question.
And
right?
no, but real question, because now you want to do business with Angola, right? And there you need to bear in mind that you're paying dollarized prices, and you're coming from a currency that perhaps is not as heavy. And so to what degree do you think that this should be worked on? Is it something that, as Dr. Thawela says, we'll see, at the second stop? Or should we be trying to balance the different ingredients that will make this thing work, including that of currency, and do it as we go?
Well, I don't have to say this to you. You know how complex these issues are, particularly when we talk about monetary issues.
Sure.
Should we have one currency, a couple of currencies? Should we target to this or to that? I mean, that is something that the discussion has already started. The Afreximbank has already developed a payment system. But you remember, actually, when we sort of saw M-Pesa in Nairobi, that was about 15, 20 years ago, actually, it just pop up. I mean, there must have been some thinking behind it,
Sure.
but it caught up actually the entire continent and then the entire world. What is encouraging is at least this has been sort of recognized as an issue. And there is a commitment, there is a willingness actually to find a solution to this problem. But at this stage, actually, we've been, as I said, we've been doing business for quite some time, although not really to the extent that we want to do business, intra-African trade. We've been perhaps, to some extent, restricted by the fact that all these currencies are somewhat making it very difficult. But West Africa, many of the West African countries use one currency, although there is debate whether that currency is the right currency or not. Central Africa, the same thing. So I think this is work in progress. At least we've started talking about it at this moment, and I'm encouraged actually by that focus at this moment.
All right, I love the different views that we are getting on the same subject matter. We have 2 minutes left, and therefore in a minute each, I would like to ask both of you for your parting shot. At the Leadership Summit, One Africa, One Voice, but in relation to the AFCFTA, what action is needed to really make it move the needle? Dr. Tawela.
So I think from my side, I think the summary would be that, yes, One Africa, One Voice. I think we're all working towards the Africa we want in terms of Agenda 2063. And I think we need to start understanding regional imperatives like the AFCFTA and connecting those to our national imperatives and our national development and making those connections and making those links.
Kibo?
In the 1940s, when Europe actually launched the common market, it was really not an issue of trade, but really an issue of peace. Actually, they were just coming out from the Second World War, and they sort of decided that we will not have any kind of war in our continent. And so the best way was really to collaborate with one another. And I think we need really to find or focus on the same issue here in the continent. I think above all, we need peace. And to bring peace, actually, we have to work together, and we have to trade together, and we have to support together. And this is the message, actually, that I would like, actually, to bring at this stage.
All right. Thank you to the both of you. Nothing further to add. But thank you for your wonderful contribution. And just looking at the responses from the poll, I'm wondering if we can even get to the poll question moved to this slide. Perfect. So in terms of the understanding of the AFCFTA, so majority say they do have a basic knowledge. I see that the votes are still coming in, but I think that it speaks to the point that both of you have raised in the amount of work that is still needed to be done on the ground to get a greater understanding of what this tool means for your business, for you as an individual, and why you should be backing it, and what it could mean for the continent. So definitely an area of opportunity, I believe, for all stakeholders involved, from the governments at national, at regional level, to the private sector, to get that word out there. Just as we have seen, I think, in terms of raising awareness around the COVID-19 vaccine, the importance of spreading information and the right information in achieving a greater efficacy of the goal. But with that said, once again, I'd like to formally thank the panelists with a round of applause. And thanks to the audience members for your engagement, as well as those who were tuned in virtually. I do believe that Mumbi is standing by. Mumbi, I'm throwing it back to you, ma'am, to continue doing a wonderful job, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Fifi, and thank you to our panelists for that very thought-provoking discussion. As we continue listening to the different sessions, please remember to keep tagging the summit on Twitter. The tag is at AfricaSVS, hashtag ASVLS21. I'll repeat that, at AfricaSVS. The hashtag is ASVLS21. For those in the room, I had forgotten to mention the Wi-Fi access. So the username is ballroom, and the password is EASY, easy. Doesn't get easier than that. Okay, just some thoughts around the discussion. You know, there's this prominent issue of awareness, and I think also, again, bringing it back also to academic institutions. You know, we train hundreds of MSMEs. We train them about financial literacy. We train them about their supply chain. So I think that's also a challenge for us to think about how to integrate knowledge about the trade agreement, the benefits that they can, you know, be expected to accrue from participating. I also think, just from discussions that we've been having leading up to the summit, you know, cultural integration is core. And even when we think about the diversity of languages that we speak, it starts with simple things like making sure everybody learns French, learns English, a common way we can interact with each other. I've also been reflecting a lot about what one panelist, I think he will come later on in the day, Bright Simon, said in a webinar I attended. He has written a very interesting article in the Harvard Business Review about the idea of nano multinationals. So very small businesses, but then with a regional and global footprint. And I think when I think about the way in which our businesses work and some of the core principles that are espoused by shared value, this idea of trust being a basis for the way in which we interact with this agreement and scale it across these small businesses is something which we really have to think very carefully about. I think it could be a very interesting model that we could showcase to other countries, where we show them how small businesses here can work regionally based on trust. I'll also invite Simba just to give any observations he has made. I'm sure he also has many things to say to that.
I think for me, I would agree with what Dr. Tuwela said and said, look, you gotta simplify the free trade agreement for the SMEs. But in simplifying that, Ayabonga's questions are similar questions that I would ask, even if I was an SME or a small business, and what's in it for me, right? If I trade with my colleague in Kenya, or I trade with my colleague in the DRC or in Cape Verde, which currency do I get paid in and when? If I'm to sign up to a payment platform, what are the exchange control? What are the exchange gains? What are the exchange losses? What are the risks involved? You know, are there any fiscal incentives for me to really be part of or really utilize the free trade area? I mean, we can have, it's a good idea, but until you simplify it to the very basics, that someone who's in agriculture or someone who needs to order cloth so they can make a dress for Fifi needs to understand, how do I get paid is one of the key things that is going to hinge on this free trade agreement. So maybe at the same time that we're driving this free trade agreement, we also need to decide as Africa, what is the base currency? So Dr. Kibo mentioned the European free marketplace, but that's based on the euro, right? So in our cases in Africa, which currency do we use? Do we use the naira? Do we use the rand? Do we use the Zimbabwe dollar? Do we use the shilling? What currency do we use? And also, how do you bring about different fiscal or monetary regimes across 54 nations to agree to this? So these are one of the things that, some of the reflections that I have. But without further ado, I think our next session is on leadership views on accelerating economic growth. Now, Fifi knows him the way she knows him, and the bio I'm looking at knows him the way doesn't know the way I know this next speaker. But anyway, Ayabonga Kawe, you know, I envy him because he's got a better beard than mine, weighing in somewhere between Os Durant and Bakis Botha. Ayabonga is a Johannesburg-based development economist, columnist, broadcaster, activist. He is MD of Baby Jesus, please don't let me murder the name of his company, Klesibe Holdings. a platform involved in advisory, facilitation, and content development across a wide range of fields. He also hosts Metro FM Talk on Metro FM and writes regular columns for Business Day. Without further ado, Ayabonga, welcome to the stage.
Thank you so much. So it wasn't too difficult, Simba. Wasn't too difficult. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. And as Simba has already said, my name is Ayabonga Cawe. I'm a broadcaster, I'm an economist, and I also, I guess, happen to dabble in a bit of teaching as well. And I was sitting frantically writing notes during Fifi's session because I do think that a lot of what we're speaking about here could potentially be the case studies for very deep inquiries into trying to understand some of these really unprecedented social changes that we faced with in the continent and beyond it. Of course, this morning, I have the fortune, I must say, of getting to speak to a few business leaders and getting to hear their perspectives on how they are grappling with some of these changes, what they mean to their operations, what they mean to them as leaders, and more importantly, how their enterprises and their leadership strategies and styles will respond to these changes. And a lot of them have to do with what was discussed in that session on the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. How do we break down, in many ways, the commercial borders between 54 nations with their own flags, with their own agendas, with their own interests, in order to create a common marketplace. Because we often say here in South Africa that a market of just shy of 60 million people is certainly not a big enough one to influence some of the micro-level decisions that business people and many other people make on a day-to-day basis. It's a pleasure for me to be here today, and I want to thank the team at the Shared Value Africa Initiative for the invite. I think, Tiki, I've been here since the first one, and it's always a pleasure to get to speak to people who are engaged in business, but who are beginning to think about questions of the triple bottom line in a very innovative way. And I certainly know that many of the panelists who are going to be joining me on the stage and also on Zoom in the next few minutes or so certainly are cut from that type of cloth. So allow me at this point to first welcome two of my panelists who are with me here in person. And it's great, I think Fifi touched on this, very great to have the opportunity, coming as we do from the last 18 to 24 months that have been really difficult, to be able to meet one another in this way. And I'm going to call up William and also Adiolu to join me on the stage. I'll say a bit more about them and the work that they do. Also going to be joined on the... Yes, yeah? Please. I share Fifi's sentiment that we kind of need to get used to being in a room together again. We have to get used to clapping, right? We have to get used to preparing ourselves to make inputs and contributions. And so please give William and Adiolu another round of applause for us. I also have on Zoom, who are joining us, I guess, virtually and living vicariously through all of us, I guess. Ian Williamson from Old Mutual, also joined by Peter from Safaricom, and I'll say a bit more about them when they get an opportunity to give some opening remarks. But suffice to say that it's a real pleasure to be with you all this morning and to have the opportunity to get some reflections from leaders in the world of enterprise who are faced in many of their organizations by unprecedented change, but also as members of the communities they come from. How do they grapple with this change, and how does it inform, of course, the pursuit of an economic growth path that is inclusive, an economic growth path that recognizes that the digital, energy, social, and demographic transitions that we're faced with are certainly going to bring about changes that require agility and flexibility to respond. But also, in many ways, what does all of this mean for small and medium-sized enterprises, and what does it mean for commonly shared and inclusive prosperity on our continent? So what we're going to do is we're going to start with the people that are joining us vicariously through the interwebs. And I'm going to start with Ian Williamson, who's been at Old Mutual since 1993. Now that's a long time ago. I mean, a lot of the people in the room might not have been born by then. or maybe not. Now, Ian Williamson's been there since 1993. Old Mutual left and came back, and Ian's still with them. So certainly he has the staying power of somebody that is often, I guess, uncharacteristic for many of those in the financial services sector. But Ian, let's give you an opportunity to give us some of your opening remarks and some of your own, I guess, reflections on what we can do to not only just accelerate growth on our continent, but do so in a way that is inclusive and whose distributional consequences are something that all of us can live with. So let's give you an opportunity, and welcome to the platform, Ian.
Oh, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you to Tiki and the Shared Value Africa for the invite. Like you, we've participated in this discussion for a few years now, and it's very much, one, close to my heart, and two, very much a part of how we think about business at Old Mutual. So maybe just to preface my remarks with a few things, I think the African continent is obviously as you said, 54 nations of fantastic cultural and language diversity. What it has going for it, I think, in a global context, at a very fundamental level, is probably the most favorable demographics of any continent in the world. We have the youngest and one of the few remaining growing continental populations in the world. And from the perspective of Old Mutual as a diversified financial services supplier, and specifically as a insurance supplier, a very underpenetrated market for both financial services and more particularly for insurance services. And insurance, I think, has a fundamental role to play in the economic growth of nations and of society, both from two perspectives. First of all, the fundamental need we fulfill is to help companies and families and individuals to recover, both financially and in other ways, from unanticipated events. So if you think about COVID and its impact on the continent, we've had an unprecedented level of deaths across the continent in the last 18 months. And we've had businesses being affected dramatically in their ability to trade, thanks to government intervention to protect society from the spread of infection, but that's obviously had an impact on businesses' ability to conduct their business and to go about their business in normal ways. And insurance fundamentally exists to protect those players in the economy from those kind of events. But the second thing that it does, which I think is probably less appreciated, is it is essentially a mobilizer of savings. So what we do, the way I think about it, is we gather contributions from people on a monthly basis, and that could be towards their pensions, towards saving for their children's education, or towards contributing towards life cover, or indeed insurance for their cars or their house. And that money is then pooled by the insurance company into a material sums of money. Old Mutual manages over R1 trillion in assets. And many of those assets come into our hands on a fiduciary basis, that money belongs to the client, but have a long-term investment horizon attached to them. So we both become custodians of significant pools of capital on behalf of our clients, but equally are able to invest that capital with a long-term horizon, which makes us ideally positioned or uniquely positioned to invest in things like infrastructure, whether that is solar energy, wind energy, toll road construction, construction of student accommodation for universities. All of these examples I've quoted are assets that we physically invest in today and have invested in for some time to come. And that's quite aside from funding, listed companies on the stock exchanges or providing companies with debt funding to keep them going. So I think that puts us in a unique position to apply our minds to how we go about that investing activity. And our philosophy is very much one of responsible stewardship of client funds. Whether we think about that from the perspective of the needs of the economy generally for infrastructure or for the provision of facilities, or if we think about that with, given the topicality of COP26 at the moment from a climate lens, what's the role that we need to play as a responsible steward of that money to ensure that it's deployed in the most advantageous way? And then the final thing I would mention is the role of education, whether that is financial education or particularly in our case. I believe that there are no countries actually in the world that do a particularly good job of educating their citizenry around the basics of managing your own finances and thinking about them appropriately. And I think we play, therefore, a really critical role in helping people to understand the criticality of managing their finances appropriately for the long term and providing appropriate access to both the educational tools as well as the means to invest the money efficiently and for good long-term benefit. So to that end, I think two things in the current environment. One has been the challenges of access during lockdown periods and such like, and we've had to dramatically accelerate, I think, like many other companies and industries, the digitalization of our business. And the primary lens that we've adopted in going about that activity has been around how do we improve access for customers and potential customers. And the other thing we've done is we've thought quite hard around how we think about financial inclusion and financial education. And we've constructed a rewards program for our customers, which I'm really proud of. It's one of the fastest growing rewards programs in the last 2 years in the financial services sector, certainly in South Africa. And essentially it's constructed around rewarding people for taking the right actions to safeguard their financial futures. We refer to it internally as encouraging customers to eat their financial Brussels sprouts. It's not always fun dealing with your finances. Repeated surveys around the world have shown that people hate budgeting and financial planning even more than they hate going to the dentist. So how do you reward people for undertaking activities which they fundamentally would prefer not to be doing immediately? And how do we make that a more pleasurable experience? So in short, I think Africa is a very exciting place to be at the moment. We all know the challenges, and I think many business leaders and business executives in Africa have really cut their teeth on a very tough operating environment with a fair amount of volatility. But equally, I think it's a continent of fabulous opportunity, thanks to the demographic dividend and the maturing of the economic value chains across the continent in general. So thanks for that opportunity, and I'll hand back to the rest of the panel to give them an opportunity and share the time fairly. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Ian. And I guess it could only have been Brussels sprouts. It couldn't have been carrots or anything like that, because I guess of the colors involved. So we'll certainly give you that opportunity. No, not a problem there. Let me call up the next business leader who we have on the line, and that is Peter Ndegwa. He joins us all the way from Nairobi. He's the CEO of Safaricom PLC, a quarter of a century worth of experience in the well, not necessarily in the financial services sector, across a wide, diverse set of sectors, and somebody who will certainly be following very closely the latest developments coming out of the Horn of Africa, and he'll maybe tell us a bit more about some of his thoughts and reflections on that. So Peter, let me hand over to you, and yeah, look forward to some of your opening remarks.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you, Ayabonga, for the intro. And good afternoon, everyone, and my fellow panelists, and also all attending online. And I would like to thank Techie and Shared Value Africa for inviting me again. I participated last year when we were reflecting on purpose-led leadership, especially as we handled the crisis. So I'll talk about Safaricom for those who might not know. I've been with Safaricom for just over 1.5 years. I joined in the middle of the crisis last April, so went through onboarding during the crisis. But Safaricom is the largest telecommunications business in Eastern Africa, and also the pioneer for mobile money, M-Pesa, the world famous M-Pesa. And today M-Pesa in Kenya has 28 million, and across Africa in total 50 million. We crossed 50 million recently from when you add the Kenya numbers to the rest of Africa. And the other aspect that is quite special about Safaricom, although it's only 21 years, so we are celebrating 21 this month, is that it's been a purpose-led business, really goes well beyond commercial objectives. We wire the way we think about business. We wire purpose in the way we think about business. And that's one of the reasons why M-Pesa came into play. We were looking for a way of solving a societal problem, which was financial inclusion. And although we are in connectivity business, we decided that we would deal with the aspect of financial inclusion. And that's how M-Pesa was born. And today M-Pesa is kind of ubiquitous as a brand, and many people in Kenya and across the region don't carry their wallets because they have their mobile phone. So even as we experienced the crisis during COVID, connectivity and financial inclusion became central to how the countries coped with the crisis. We were involved heavily in partnership with others to make sure that we could support the society, but also government in reducing the impact of the crisis with zero-rated transactions here in this country below $10. And actually, in total, we gave 1.7 billion zero-rated transactions worth about $40 billion US across the M-Pesa franchise. So a couple of things that we've seen, we realize just how important connectivity is. The crisis really showed how important connectivity is, and the difference between those connected and those not connected, and also even the difference between those who have handsets that are kind of basic handsets, 2G handsets, versus those who have 4G enabled handsets, and the importance of upgrading customers from 2G to 4G as it improves their ability to access the internet beyond calling, voice call. Access to the internet became a lot more important. And in partnership with Google and others, we have now come up with a pay-as-you-go proposition that allows customers to upgrade their 2G to 4G by paying a small deposit of $5 and then paying 20 US cents every day off their M-Pesa. So two things there. One is the importance of connectivity. The second is using digital financial services to enable lifestyle in a way that is that works in a remote environment. And we normally also say that M-Pesa is a barometer of how the economy is operating, and we've seen significant impact of digital financial services since we started M-Pesa. So financial inclusion, and Ian spoke about some of that. Financial inclusion in Kenya has shifted from the mid-20s about 13 years ago when M-Pesa was started to now in the 80s. And that is significant. And financial inclusion in particular has benefited women because we know the women are the core of the economy. And more financial independence, not just financial inclusion, but also financial independence. And even as we think about adoption of digital going forward, it's about broadening it beyond payments and P2P, persons-to-persons transfers, to actually becoming a lifestyle brand. So during the past 18 months, we've seen a significant shift in people's use of digital ecosystem. So we recently launched an M-Pesa app in Kenya, and already within 3 months of launch, we have 4 million downloads of that app, and it's becoming kind of a lifestyle tool. So we do believe that as the country and as the region and as Africa digitize, we can be able to empower individuals to live the lifestyle they want, but also SMEs in particular and micro SMEs to adopt in a cheaper way so that their business is more effective and more costly and more cost effective. Digital channels that allows the enterprises to do business in a way that is more accessible, more affordable, and also they can interact and connect with their own customers. So the power of collaboration, the power of partnership, we can't do it alone, and the power of bold leadership. So ensuring that during this period, whether that is managing the crisis and going beyond in terms of the recovery process, partnering with others and understanding that bold leadership and bold decisions are required in order for us to empower individuals and enterprise to live their lives and conduct their operations in the best way possible. So looking forward to the conversations today, and looking forward to how we enable recovery across the region using digital financial services and connectivity products.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that contribution, Peter. And Peter Ndegwa there, the CEO of Safaricom PLC. And I guess one of the things he touches on is this issue of convergence. All of the banks are telcos, and all of the telcos are banks. And I guess some of the retailers might be a semblance of both. And that's something we'll come back to, and of course, what implications that has for SMMEs as well. Now, let me come to my guests who are with me here on stage. And I want to first get some inputs from Adeole Adewumize, who is with Allianz Nigeria Insurance, where she is the CEO. And 2 decades worth of experience in the financial services sector for Adeolu. She's an avid coach, mentor, and also an avid runner as well. And Adeolu, I want to welcome you not just to the platform, but to South Africa as well. And do share with us some of your opening reflections as well.
Okay, thank you, Ayabonga. And I also have to thank Tiki and the team. I believe this is the 4th time you've been able to snag me for one of your events just this year alone. I'm not sure how we found each other. I don't recall anymore. But it's nice to finally, this is the first time we've actually seen each other in person. And I'm glad to be here in Johannesburg in South Africa. I think Ian has done a great job in talking about the challenges insurance has faced across Africa, looking from the Old Mutual side. So I'd rather bring it a bit more personal to the challenges over the last 2 years for me as a person living in Africa, and for one small business in one rather large country in Africa as part of the bigger Allianz family. So 2 years ago, I'm currently based in Lagos, Nigeria, but 2 years ago, I was based in a different country doing a different job. So when COVID hit in, let's say, January, February, March of last year, I was based in Nairobi, Kenya, running mergers and acquisitions for Allianz across Africa. Looking to sign a deal, the largest deal actually in financial services in East Africa, named Deal of the Year for 2020. And at the same time, as a mother of two small boys, a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old, who all of a sudden landed in my lap at home, having to be schooled. So this is a story that might be familiar to a number of you. And so I realized very quickly that I'm not cut out to be a teacher and that I have very little patience. But it was interesting to see over the last 2 years how COVID and the challenges that COVID brought to the world brought our family together, but also brought our family apart. And I'll explain what I mean in a minute or so. So going back to that year, like I said, with 2 small kids, having to be schooled at home, trying to balance one of the largest deals of my career with having to manage as a working mother at home. Also a sister and a daughter. So I had my father, who, when my mother late, was actually in lockdown, complete lockdown, in a new city where he had taken a new job, not knowing that this situation was about to hit. So supporting him emotionally, also having to support my family very physically, and also run a mergers and acquisitions deal. So this was my life for a number of months. This was the life of many of my colleagues, of many of you. Then a few months into it, as we were starting to find our pace, starting to figure out how this all works, even the teachers, we were starting to come together. Then I got a call that I was needed in Nigeria. And as a Nigerian, of course, that was a dream come true, but the timing was less than ideal. And so one of the first decisions I had to make, and I had to put my foot down and say, I'm not moving my family in the middle of a global pandemic. So for 1 year, I actually had to commute 5 to 6 hours between Nairobi and Lagos every few weeks, running a company that was going through a transformation of its own in a quite difficult business environment. So Allianz, we came into Allianz 2.0. One of the things that the pandemic did for me as an individual, but also for the company, is to help us to redefine and refocus what we want our purpose and our vision to be in the society that we're in. And we'll talk about some of that later, and we're talking about some of that over the next 2 days. But we really did a pivot, looked at our purpose, looked at our vision, looked at the culture that we're building within Allianz in Nigeria, saying that we want to secure the future. We want to secure the future not only of our customers, but of ourselves as employees. What does that mean? What do we need to change in a post-COVID world? Looking to see how we can use digital tools so that our employees could remain safe, not just for the short term, but for the long term, because COVID also did bring opportunity to realize that we could do business differently, to realize that we didn't all have to sit here, 300 people, which is also very nice. But there's a benefit to this hybrid approach where people who are not able to travel, people who have other commitments, can participate in an event like this. People who live long distances from their workplaces. Lagos is a city of over 20 million people, where people sometimes have to sit in traffic for 3, 4, 5 hours one way. And all this lost time has been given back to our folks as they're able to work from anywhere. So we have a hybrid working approach as well, just like we have the hybrid conference today. So going back to my point about my family coming together, but then my family also now being apart for the last year. The good news is that 2 months ago, I was able to bring my family over to Lagos. So now we're all together in Lagos, dealing with all the peculiarities of that city. And as Allianz, looking forward to the end of a tough transformation year, but now we can start to look external, so that the value that we want to bring to the society that we've already been building within our company, we can also then turn external and look at what value can we bring to MSMEs, starting with individuals. I'll talk about the MBA program that we just set up, but even going wider into risk management solutions in different travel or in health insurance or other agriculture, other areas where these are the drivers that will bring Nigeria and Africa as a whole to the place where it needs to be.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that, Adeolu, and we'll come back, I guess, to some of what you're sharing around what the strategic shifts in your own organization might mean for many other Nigerians who have been experiencing the same, I guess, operating environment, least of all many of the SMMEs and micro SMEs in that neck of the woods. Let me bring in William Dachs now. He's with the Gautrain Management Agency. And William has decades of experience in structuring and designing public-private partnerships, because a big part of what we were speaking about earlier was that the immensity of the challenges that we faced with don't lend themselves to just having one stakeholder resolving them. And a big part of the resolution process will require collaboration. It's also going to require some form of partnership. And I guess no better partnership, William, than the one that's just down the road. And I know many of the people who are joining us in the room might have come via Gautrain. I certainly hope they have. Yes. But this has also been a very difficult moment for yourselves, people not commuting as much as they did before. And look forward to some of your opening remarks on how the Gautrain Management Agency is grappling with some of this.
Yeah, thanks, Ayabonga. Got to start off with a personal note here. First of all, I love our product. The Gautrain is fantastic. I myself came by train this morning. Second, sort of personal characteristic, I'm a jaywalker. Waiting for traffic lights is not my business. And I think I speak on behalf of most people on this wonderful continent of ours. But I was really worried this morning because to get from the station to here, I jaywalked with ease. There's no traffic. And I walked past a lot of shuttered restaurants. I walked past a lot of to-let signs. All the big property agencies are putting up big signs. Sandton's empty. Sandton's empty. And remember, Sandton is the economic heart of South Africa, I'm going to say Southern Africa, and it's a big part of the African economy as well. So let's put a pebble in our shoe. Let's not be comfortable. We have an economic crisis in the country in South Africa, but I suspect that it's probably across the world, across the continent as well. So we've got to have some good discussions about how we can transform that, use partnerships. But maybe just to reflect a little bit on my journey, our journey in the Gautrain Management Agency. I was in Sandton 20 months ago, I think it was, and the president, I think that very day, announced the lockdown, and we had to pull all our trains in, power them down. It was a very sad moment. And I remember thinking, what are we going to do? How do we manage this? And I think sort of 4 points as I was jotting down this morning. The first is that there was that deal with the immediate. How do we get through this? First of all, we had to protect our assets. The rail line, the copper cables, everything. When you're not running a train, they get very vulnerable. Protect jobs. We went to our partners and we said, right up front, no one loses their job here. We, as leadership, have got to make sure that that jobs are protected, because we're going to emerge from this. We don't know whether it's short to medium term, but it's not long term, and job preservation is important. And obviously, we had to protect our passengers. Ayabonga, you might remember we had some good stuff and some bad stuff. Our spray booths were bad stuff. I don't know if you remember that one. We sprayed our passengers in the mistaken belief that that would somehow get rid of COVID. But it was kind of, I would defend it strongly in dealing with the now. Second note that I made was to stay calm. Right? Too soon to panic. And I think from a leadership point of view, that was very important in terms of not just the team that I work with, but in terms of our shareholders, our stakeholders. It's very important that there be this sense of it's going to be okay. We'll get through this. And linked to that is staying positive. And I think that was very, very important in terms of just being able to say to people in our team, our partners, the Bombela Consortium, again, we're in this together, but we're going to solve the problems. And we started off in that May 2020 from zero ridership. We had to rebuild our business. 4th of May, we opened up to 3,000 or 4,000 passengers, where we had been doing over 60,000 passengers a day. We had moved 150 million people, by the way, in the 10 years up to that. So staying positive and rebuilding the business. But kind of the 4th point is the most important one, where I think we need to come back to this economic growth, is thinking long term. And I'm so afraid that we kind of, as a country, we fall into short-termism. You know, what do we do today or tomorrow? William, how many riders have you got? What's today's ridership? How many buses are running at the moment? Those aren't our challenges. Our challenges are the economic impact of good, well-planned infrastructure, and how do we get that going? And secondly, climate change. You know, when we calculate how many tons of carbon dioxide emissions we've saved over the last 10 years, and we extrapolate that and we say, but how do we continue having that impact? And what happens if we don't do it? We're keenly aware that that's an absolutely critical environment. Also thinking long term, something I'm really worried about is congestion on our roads. You know, our expert economists tell us that a competitive city needs mobile people. A competitive country needs mobile goods. And at the moment, I'm a little bit worried that we're going to become complacent and we're not going to have mobility for people and goods. And that could really hinder our growth as a country. And again, I'm sure that's true in most countries in Africa.
William, thank you very much. And I maybe want to start, I guess, with a question for all of my panelists, but starting, you know, in your part of the world, in our rail network. A big part of what we're trying to face as we think long-term now is about not only just ensuring efficiency, but assuring resilience of these systems, resilience of your assets, of your processes, of your business, and of course the resilience of our broader economy. You spoke earlier on about, I guess, the task of protecting some of your assets. We've seen, even during July, you know, the tail end of a continuing process of the stripping of assets, you know, least of all in our rail network. Some of your thoughts around how you see the Gautrain as a model contributing to the resilience of the South African economy. And even, I would argue, I guess, to the resilience of the more underperforming passenger rail system.
Yeah. So I'm going to be very careful not to jump into other people's territory, but very happy to talk about from a Gautrain perspective. I think Gautrain works because the PPP is structured in a way that asset preservation is a contractual requirement. You know, so if you think from a private sector point of view, taking on that risk, right in 2005, 2006, Bombela, our private party, had to think about long-term asset preservation and maintenance. They had to fund it, they had to go to their equity investors, to their banks, to say, will we have enough money in 2020 to maintain and secure the assets? Now, across government, we don't normally work like that. We kind of build and hope. So there's quite hard contractual elements to the PPP that really make it work. It's forward thinking, it's risk management, and it's resulted in us, never mind just COVID and asset preservation from theft and vandalism, even prior to COVID, Gautrain is South Africa's only A-rated public infrastructure in the whole country, as rated by the South African Institute of Civil Engineers. So there's a history of good planning and good maintenance, and that's key.
Yeah. Adeolu, similar question, I guess for you and for Ian. You guys are in the business of ensuring that you're smoothing the shocks of an economic actor, right? From the household to the firm to the small mom and pop shop in a corner. And I'm interested in how sort of this notion of resilience fits into your work, because effectively you're doing something that has a direct impact on the ability of people to bounce back from those shocks. What are some of the big shocks that you've seen in your key markets? And maybe we'll start with East Africa and also touch on the Nigerian market. For some of the smaller guys in the sort of distribution of firms that you might have on your books, what are some of the big things that you've seen where you can say this one is a particular insurable risk that is bound to be made a lot worse by the COVID pandemic and, of course, I guess whatever path it takes from here onwards?
Right. Yes, thank you for that question, Ayabonga. So I would say, and I'm sure Ian can share some of these, is that the biggest risks right now that we're seeing across Africa and across the world are related directly to the pandemic.
Sure.
Right? So when we look at business interruption risk, where the transport of goods and services are not as easy anymore, even just sourcing materials. We saw that a lot of materials were coming from China to the U.S., and there were a number of things that were no longer being able to be made because in the past we went to the cheapest source to manufacture, and it turned out to be China, and so there was a lack of diversification as to where things were being made, and that was the impact. Then we see cyber. So I love working from home. Many people love working from home and virtually, but there is a downside to that. It means that many of our employees are working in locations where, despite all the tools and firewalls and things like that we put in place, our human nature being human nature, they might work outside of that. And this then opens us up and many companies to cyber risk. And we're seeing the impact of that globally, where cyber used to be a very manageable risk that Allianz itself is one of the largest insurance companies or insurers of cyber risk. But now we're coming to a state that cyber is almost, or the risk around cyber is almost becoming a pandemic of its own.
Yeah.
And then how do you manage that risk when it's a risk that everybody is exposed to? So it almost becomes unmanageable. So I would say that those are the two key areas. Of course, there are particular sectors that have been quite hit, travel and hospitality being the obvious one. And so Allianz Nigeria has done some mitigation around updating some of our products and solutions to cover the impacts of COVID and other pandemics that weren't considered when these products were put together.
Yeah. And I guess just on the issue of cyber risk, I mean, if there's any major entity in this economy that has faced that particular challenge, certainly it has to be Transnet. And I would be interested to hear some thoughts. Ian, same question to you, I guess, by way of some of the major challenges that have been brought about by the pandemic. Adeolu speaks about business interruption risks, but one would also think, I guess, there would be a wide range of insurable risks that have certainly shocked many small and medium-sized enterprise, and I guess disturbed or delayed that path of growth into becoming a much larger entity.
Yeah, for sure. I think, Adeolu's spot on with the big ones from a, let's call it a property and casualty perspective. The two other areas where we certainly saw large claims were both on the trade credit side. So because of supply chain disruption, you ended up with small businesses in particular in a quite a significant cash flow crunch, and their ability to service their suppliers' invoices timelessly was impacted significantly. I think, the likes of the hospitality industry, the property industry, the average landlord was really struggling, severely impacted. And then, of course, Old Mutual has a bigger life book than it does short-term insurance. So the straightforward impact of COVID on illness, health insurance, and mortality and morbidity, very, very significant. And I think that's triggered a conversation globally, I think, amongst the reinsurers and the global system of whether pandemic risk generally is adequately priced for and how that needs to be thought about going forward. So many of the insurers, the direct writers such as ourselves and Allianz would have reinsured or laid off much of the risk to global companies, and the biggest losses globally have ended up there. So the reinsurers are are thought leaders in a sense in the global risk management industry around this, and are having to think very hard around whether our current risk management models adequately allow for not COVID, as it were, but other pandemics that might come along in the future. And I think the two biggest topics of conversation in that environment at the moment are climate risk for the future and pandemic risk for the future.
Thank you for that input, Ian. And I don't want to, I guess, stay too much in the risk matrix because I guess we might end up overlooking some of the opportunities. And maybe, Peter, let me bring you in here. As a major regional and continental telecoms player, I guess the fact that many people have been working from home, have had to be tooled accordingly to do that, has meant massive surge in demand for one of your key products, and that's the provision of data for connectivity purposes. What opportunities have come with the pandemic, and more importantly, what do they teach us about how we get many of our economies on a sustained growth footing?
Yeah, thank you, Ayabonga. And you're right. And just before I leave the risk, I couldn't avoid the temptation just to.
Okay, no, it's fine. Go ahead.
To say a little bit, because we are in a technology business, so we provide connectivity and mobile digital financial services. So, and the risk component is more in the context of now we are an essential service, and the countries rely on us. So it's no longer just about risk management, but providing stable, secure, safe, user-friendly, kind of accessible services is fundamental, and you're almost systemic in the way that M-Pesa and digital financial services play in the lives of both individuals, but also micro and SMEs. So cyber data privacy, for example, become a lot more important. Just stability, being able to connect today on Zoom. If we went off, you don't have a chance to be able to have this type of connection. So, but just going back to the opportunity, we have seen significant growth in demand for access to internet on the connectivity side, whether that is at home. So, for example, last year in Kenya, we doubled bandwidth across our fiber to home and also fiber to business, to the extent that business was open, just to give that reassurance to individuals and businesses that they could work from home, and that capacity has been fully utilized. On the mobile connectivity side, we saw significant surge in demand, and we build a lot of capacity on 4G. Now we are in Kenya, we are 95%, and we've seen all that utilized. So we are seeing huge demand for connectivity, but also we are seeing a lot more demand for even in areas which we thought were not as important. Everyone wants to be connected. And on the digital financial services, which is on the M-Pesa side, we've seen, of course, huge increase, especially as with zero-rated transactions, more than 50% increase in transaction value. But also businesses demanding to do transactions remotely, enabling digital commerce, starting to also think about different ecosystems like education, demand for kids to be in school, health being delivered remotely, or even other systems. So the reliance on digital ecosystem becomes a lot more important. And on the financial services side, beyond payments, just starting to broaden. I know Ian spoke about insurance, saying, I mean, it has shown just how big the gap is in terms of under penetration of insurance or savings and so on, and those can be delivered through digital ecosystems. So there's huge, and then cross-border piece becomes even more important.
Thank you very much, Peter, for that comment. And maybe, Adeola, I want to bring you in here, because one of the things Ian speaks about is the pricing of risk. Critical input, I guess, in your operations, pricing that accordingly, making sure that you also covered adequately on your end. And I'm quite interested, I guess, in this penetration that Peter's talking about, of smartphones really, I guess, becoming a bank in your pocket in a way. The type of data points that come through there, do they help you in better pricing some of that risk? especially when it comes to customers who ordinarily would not have had a bank account or don't have a bank account, and this is their primary, channel to financial access?
Well, the short answer is yes. So data has become king, right? And so companies who are able to utilize and leverage and collect that data will have the advantage. In some markets, it's easier than others to collect that data. I would say that in many of our African countries, unfortunately, we don't have the sort of technological infrastructure in place to collect as much data as we would like. Kenya does a bit better in that area. If I look at just a very concrete example, in terms of getting just the financial data of our competitors. In Kenya, that comes out every quarter. So, and in Nigeria, we're still struggling to get the financial information from 2020, and we're already at the end of 2021. But governments have recognized and regulators have recognized that data is critical, and regulators themselves are becoming digital so that they can actually ask companies to submit data like this. We can start doing analysis. We can start understanding, if I take the motor industry, how people are driving, how far they're driving, what kind of risks are involved in the way they're driving. And this is the way that you can make the targeted solutions to be better. Pricing, everyone always complains about the price of their insurance products. The better the data is, the better that pricing and more individual that pricing can become.
Sure.
So I can say that, Ayobongo, you are a certain age, you have a certain, you're working in a certain sector, so your price will be different from maybe William, who's a different age, working in a different sector. This is where we're heading in terms of pricing.
William, let me bring you in here, because I guess a similar point applies, although yours would be largely from a mobility perspective. I mean, I remember the first few weeks of the lockdown, there were all of these mobility heat maps that were being published. Just showing us, how few people are moving through the malls, how few people are moving through public transport, transit nodes. How much of that data filters into your own planning of your service? Because a lot of people have said one of the things that can grow this economy is to have a vibrant nighttime economy. I'm not going to go out to the pub very late at night if the train, maybe ends just before 9 p.m.
So a lot of data came through. Those heat maps were very, very interesting. But what we picked up very quickly was that we remained an essential mover of people who didn't have a car.
Sure.
And one really interesting kind of bit of data that came out, the waves. You all remember the waves, right? Well, hopefully we can forget about them soon. The number of people who used the minibuses, these are contracted minibus taxi association contracts, never dipped with the waves. So what does that tell you? That tells you that these are people who can't afford not to go to work or wherever they were going to. And the second thing it told you about them is that they had to, that was their mode. They didn't have an alternative. They couldn't go into their own car or any other alternative. So that kind of changed our business focus. We're doing much more contracting with the minibus taxi associations now. We're scaling down on bigger buses. So these things really change our approach to business. As to your point about the hours, our commuters have different timetables now. It used to be very concentrated peak movements to and from work. People generally didn't stay out late, or if they did, they used Uber or so. Now it's fairly constant throughout the day. People are moving differently. We don't have all the answers, but we are investing in the technology of finding out where people are coming from and going to, so that we can be much more agile in being part of their trip, rather than just a train that runs from A to B. It's a fascinating journey.
Are you going to have a nighttime service? I mean, we just had a big sporting weekend.
Yeah. So won't it be good to go back to that? We'll do it as and when required. It's quite expensive to run an after-hours service. You can imagine running big, heavy trains up and down. But for big events and for ones that we can support with our buses and minibuses, dying to get back into that game.
Yeah. Ian, let me bring you back in here, because I guess, a lot of what the Shared Value Africa initiative tries to encourage is this idea of systems-level thinking or systems-level approaches to trying to deal with very large and seemingly intractable challenges. I'm quite interested in your reading of where we are as a continent, one in terms of the process of unifying our 54 nations on an economic basis via the AfCFTA, but also, I guess, at a national level, some of the critical actions that, in your view, could catalyze decades on decades of a sustained growth as we near, towards 2063. And we often talk about 2030 in this country, or 2030 is not even a decade away now, so maybe 2063 might be a better marker. Some of your thoughts on what those actions could potentially be, and it might be actions in the public sector, or even actions of a collaborative set of stakeholders. What would some of those be?
Yeah, I think we've got in honesty, a long way to go in that sense. I think some of the drivers I spoke about earlier around demography and the market development, almost in market, are likely to be the real drivers in the short to medium term. I think the cross-continental pieces may help us to amplify some of that impact by essentially improving the mobility of goods and services across borders to different markets, and allowing specialism, I guess, of providers who can provide certain goods and services for a bigger target market at scale. But the challenges to that, I think the first and simplest is logistics. And I think a speaker in one of the earlier panels was referring to this point about the difficulty of moving physical goods across the African continent is enormous. Whether it's to do with country border issues, or simple road infrastructure and transport issues, or the consistency of the rail infrastructure across the continent, there are a lot of logistical challenges. I would put that as item one, and probably, in a sense, the easiest issue to resolve. I think the principle of a mutually acceptable sort of common currency, and the policy certainty that needs to come across the regions for businesses to confidently take long-term investment decisions without having to put enormous risk premiums on their capital. Those, for me, are the big three, essentially. So sure. There's a country risk kind of premium that I think many of our continental countries attract in global investment markets because of history, because of country policies and shifts in the sands of country policy that increase uncertainty for investors. I think overcoming that and overcoming the infrastructure deficit are the big things from my perspective.
Okay. Peter, same question to you. 2 or 3 catalytic actions that can ensure that the continent is on a sustained footing and we're able to grow our economies, and while also dealing with many of the socio-economic challenges that we're faced with.
Yeah, so for me, the one area that we need to do something material is how we support small and medium-sized businesses. The SMEs and micro SMEs are at the heart of the continent. And sometimes we focus, and I've worked in global businesses, so we focus a lot more on the large corp. But actually, if we all can, even through the whole shared value initiative, can think about how do we channel our focus on supporting SMEs, access credit, deal with challenges in terms of access to markets and so on. And digital ecosystems can help. We have seen as we start through the recovery process after COVID. We've launched business apps, and the level of penetration of that is incredible. In this country, for example, we have something called Lipa na M-Pesa, Pay with M-Pesa. We've seen that double the number of merchants who are using digital payments platforms. So just initiatives that are targeted at supporting and empowering SMEs will make a big difference across the continent. The second, just going back to Ian's point, is also to iron out some of the cross-border elements, whether it's policy or regulatory frameworks, so that you have regulators working together rather than being very in-country focused. Because if you want to launch a financial product, you have to go to each regulator in each country and understand the requirements. But if we did it at a regional level, it will make a big difference. And we see it with cross-border regulation. And then, of course, the final one is this collaboration and partnerships, between telcos and financial services and insurance and so on. So because we cannot, the whole silo piece about working at an industry level doesn't quite cut if you go cross-border. So we need to partner a lot more and collaborate a lot more across border, across industry.
Thank you very much for those comments, Peter. William, I guess same question to you, and I certainly hope in your response there might be a vision of a high-speed train moving from Johannesburg through Bulawayo to Lubumbashi and all the way to Addis. Yeah,
I'd be happy to do that feasibility study. but I think where I'd like to go in my response is around the need for partnerships. Yeah. I've spent a lot of time in government, and it won't be a surprise to anyone to hear my view that public and private sectors do not understand each other. And the concept of a shared value system is so important in this. And I'll give you two small examples. So government always says private sector is just in it for profit. And profit, believe me, is a swear word in government, right? It's a bad thing. But if we can make it profit with purpose, that changes things. Profit that's invested in communities and socioeconomic development changes that discussion and that paradigm enormously. It's not extractive anymore. Then for me, the challenge in government is about upping its game in a governance stake. I mean, what private sector business would want to partner with a municipality that couldn't even get its financial statements in order? It would be hard to have a trust relationship, right, if that governance and ethics environment isn't correct. So for me, the call to arms is to start talking again and to try and establish that shared value system. I don't think there's a problem with the objectives. It's infrastructure, it's economic growth. It's what we as public and private have to do to enable that. And I think they're relatively simple things to say. They're very hard things to do, but the discussion's got to start now.
Thank you very much for that, William. And Adeolu, you have the last word.
Sure. Thank you, Ayabonga. So I'm a professor's daughter, and in addition to that, I'm a Nigerian, and Nigerians care about education, particularly for our children, and this is how we think that we can succeed. And I believe that there's truth in that. So we, as Allianz, are very focused on capability development, not just for our employees, but also in the wider social atmosphere. And so because of that, we've actually developed an online MBA scholarship. First time in Allianz history, we started with the African continent in partnership with ESMT Berlin, which is a premier MBA program in Germany, based out of Berlin. And we have 10 scholarships. We opened it up to the entire continent, so to say, of course, focused on where Allianz is actually based. So Nigeria, of course, contended for that. We had a number of people who were eager. And this is the part that makes me proud. One of the things that makes me proud this year is that one of the winners is a Nigerian. Maiwa Adebile, who is the founder of Asheke Foundation. She actually flew from Abuja to Lagos because she was just so thankful and grateful for this opportunity. that she never thought she would have. She's the first of her family to go to further education. In fact, when she first heard of the program and heard that she won, she actually didn't believe it, is what she told me. She thought it was a hoax. So I said, okay, I'll just try and I see what happens. Yeah. And the fact that she won, she was, and the experience and exposure that she's getting to outside of Nigeria, outside of Africa, and understanding that she's not alone. So a social entrepreneur in Abuja is now being exposed to other social entrepreneurs in as far flung as the Middle East, to South America, to the US, etc., and building up her leadership skills so that she can influence her circle.
Sure.
And that influence just spreads from there. So I think really for me, capability development and even just going to programs that go on one by one is really how we would succeed in Africa.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Adeolu. And also want to thank some of our panelists who've also joined us for this, William, Peter, and Ian. And maybe just a parting shot before I hand over to my friend Simba. I don't know, Adeolu, if Tiki told you of the Spelani dress in South Africa.
No, I don't.
And I think your print today looks very much like the Spelani. So I'm certainly hoping that there's a tradable opportunity for some exchange, in fabrics least of all, from the northern parts of South Africa, where the Spelani is worn by Xitsonga women. So certainly I hope Tiki will be able to give you just a crash course in where you can find a Spelani, and hopefully you can take it back with you to Nigeria.
Excellent.
So thank you very much to you, Adeolu, to you, William, and to Peter and Ian, who are joining us on Zoom. And I'm going to hand over now to my colleague Simba, and it seems it's a contest of the beards, Simba, so I'm not sure. I guess, we do have some oils we make in South Africa, so I can certainly share those with you as well.
I think I've given up. No. Thank you very much, Ayabonga. Thank you, Adeolu. Thank you very much, William. And I remain a faithful component of the Gautrain. I think it's more efficient than these big German and, British marquees of vehicles. But thank you very much. And I think for me, I think what.
Oh yes. Look at Simba chucking us out now.
Before I hold you prisoner. No, I think it was a very insightful discussion. And once again, thank you to the panelists, for Peter and Ian, who joined us online. I think it was a very insightful discussion, and I think what COVID and any crisis teaches us is that any people-centered business that takes care of its society, takes care of its clients, and takes care of its employees is one that the market will remember years down the line. And it's sort of like a strategy that builds customer loyalty. And also, when we were talking earlier of the free trade area, and Adeolu was talking about issues of manufacturing, trouble in getting goods, it sort of speaks to the concentration risk of everything being manufactured in one location. And maybe as Africa, we need to look towards that as well, to see if we can establish our own value chains between countries, which again talks to the issues of the free trade area as well. COVID also brings about new types of risks. So if the middle of Sandton is empty, and we're seeing the same thing in Zimbabwe as well in the real estate sector, what do we do with all of these buildings? Some of them that's got a very young shelf life of 5 to 10 years. Do we look for new ways of utilizing them? Do we look at new ways of working? Do we now look at new ways of movement of people? Does this mean that businesses now have to be more agile when they think up of their business strategies? Are we now talking of a 15-year, 10-year business strategy? Are we not talking of a 5-year? Are we talking of a 2-year? What is the decision-making process and the governance-making process? When we talk of private-public partnerships, for my sins, I've done work with the development sector, UN, and I'm also have a governance role in a state enterprise. And I've also noticed that profit tends to be a swear word. And the private sector guys are usually the enemies because we're more pragmatic and we're quick to the ball, say what works and what doesn't. But I think the more we talk to each other, the more we balance things out, I think there could be great opportunities there. I think these would be my comments, and get your thoughts, Mumbi.
Thanks, Simba. I'm almost wondering what to add after that. I think there's so much that's standing out for me. I think especially what Peter Ndegwa reflected on, again, as a Kenyan, you know, the importance of that digital infrastructure and how M-Pesa is a barometer, really, for how our economy is doing. I think it's thinking about how do we then harness that across Africa. This idea of long-termism, I know we've also talked a lot about this with Tiki and others. You know, how do we change the narrative so that businesses, governments can approach different things, different projects, different initiatives with that long-term horizon? The climate crisis, I think, is an opportunity, just like COVID is also an opportunity to think about also finance differently. And I'm throwing this back at the insurers in the room and elsewhere, which is, what are those products and services that we can create for small businesses, for example, especially the people who are in agriculture, to protect them against climate change? Because right now we do talk about climate risk. There are insurance models built around it, but they are largely for very big businesses. So what does that mean now for our environment here? I'd also just like to recognize Adeolu and to thank you for sharing that very personal experience, because I think it is the experience of several women having to balance multiple roles during COVID-19. So thank you for sharing that. So I'd like to then, with no further ado, bring on the next speaker who will give us the next keynote address on renewable energy, the energy system as an enabler of just transition. And I'd like to say I'm a bit of a fangirl of Maria Cristina. She is the head of Global Sustainability, Infrastructure and Networks at Enel Group. She has also, since 2014, led the CSB Sustainability Projects and Practice Sharing Unit within the Innovation and Sustainability function of Enel, being in charge, among others, of the definition and deployment of the Creating Shared Value model throughout the business value chain of the entire group. And I'm saying I'm a fangirl because, again, I'm an academic, so there is a case study of Enel Group on Harvard's repository of case studies, which I teach in class. So Maria, I hope we will be able to have you once in our classroom. But more so, I think for us it is in a time where there's increasing scrutiny on energy companies. I think we recently had a hearing of oil and gas executives in the US. I think Enel demonstrates an excellent case of just how an energy company can steer a just transition that makes sense not only for the company, but for a broader range of stakeholders. Maria, you are most welcome. We are very much looking forward to the insights that you will be sharing.
Thank you so much for this introduction. I'm so sorry for not being here with you, Tiki, and the amazing team leading the Shared Value Initiative for Africa. And I hope in the next year will be there. I will be there. Hopefully, you see, I'm at home. Digitalization is working. Hopefully, the connection will help us. But okay. As you said, and I thank you, and I promise to join you in one of your class in the next future with a great pleasure. Enel is a vertical integrated utility company and is leading at the moment the energy transition in the industry. We changed completely our business model and strategy a few years ago when we started 10 years ago exactly, our CSB journey. We jumped into the articles of the Professor Porter and Mark Kramer a few years ago, and we understood that as said by many other people before me this morning, there was a new way for companies to stay in the market in the long run. And that was exactly the beginning. Enel Green Power at that time was this small renewable company inside the huge Enel Group. And we started a shift, and now, renewable are the core strategy, and the energy mix changed completely. So the renewable energy generation overpassed the old fossil and fuel generation. Most of all, I also would like to say hello to my colleagues from South Africa, from Enel Green Power. I think that we are the first renewable operator at the moment in South Africa. So what about the energy transition and the idea of profit with purpose? If we are considering Africa, Africa is a transforming continent which in the last decades has experienced a rapid economic and demographic growth. Despite the unexpected shocks stemming from the COVID-19, the macroeconomic scenarios for Africa in the coming years are likely to remain unchanged due to demographic growth, urbanization, and economies. But access to electricity will be essential to untap Africa's potential in the post-COVID recovery and to enable a variety of long-term sustainable development objectives, from economic productivity and broad social development to job creation, improved health system, education, and poverty reduction. But when we talk and we consider the energy transition, which is a word everyone is using now, we need to think and remind that the energy transition we are facing comes from a paradox. And the paradox is, we know that due to urbanization, industrialization, and digitalization, the energy demand will grow in the next decades and will grow enormously. This is what happens in Africa again. And where is the paradox? We know at the same time that to match and to cope with the climate crisis, we need to lower the emissions. And according to me, Africa fixed that paradox perfectly well. Africa today is responsible only for the 3% of global emissions. What can we ask Africa to do more and better? Not lowering the emission for sure, but so not making the same mistakes, let's say the old mature economies and markets did, but rethink and did things in a different way. If you think that today Africa accounts for only 6% of the global energy demand, and little more of the 3% is regards the global electricity demand. Electricity consumption in the continent is low and concentrated in the North region and South Africa, with almost 600 million people still lacking access to electricity at all. But the expected electricity demand is expected to grow faster than anywhere else. So there is no one solution. There are different recipes. For sure, renewable energy sector, for sure, decentralizing the models and the business models. So we need to spread out and find out different solutions depending on where we are. If you think about the most rural and isolated areas in every country of the African continent, you see that we need to take into account also off-grid solution that in many parts of the world can make a huge different. So if we think about all this, we understand that we need really to focus on different recipes, decentralizing, giving the technology in the hands of people. And again, innovation is key, is central to change the business models and the way we are generating energy. As far as the grid solution, I will focus much more later on because there is a huge debate on generating energy, which is fine, is crucial. But nowadays, we understand that the role of the networks and the infrastructure, you have been discussing about that at the beginning of the session of this morning. But nevertheless, while in the rest of the world, the growth of renewable energy has intensively increased, only 2% of renewable addition occurred in Africa in the last decade, leaving unlocked the enormous potential of the continent in terms of demand, competitiveness, and natural resources. What does it mean? It means that now Africa needs a significant scale up in electricity sector investment in order to guarantee clean, affordable, and secure access to electricity and support continued progress towards a sustainable development. In this regard, for sure, renewable energy technologies represent the most competitive, secure, and sustainable solution to achieve universal electricity access in several African countries. Furthermore, renewable energy could create significant spillover effects across the famous 2030 Agenda dimension of sustainability. Again, for every US dollar invested in the transition towards renewable energy, in addition, USD, which is about 0.93 of GDP growth above business as usual, is expected to occur. There is a significant job creation potential from both investing in renewable energy and investing in the local supply agenda associated. Yesterday, I jumped into some figures of Kenya as far as off-grid solution, taking into account only 1 year. And it's amazing, 1 year in Kenya in developing off-grid solution brought 10,000 direct job opportunities, 15,000 informal, and 65,000 productive jobs. So these are figures we need to think and to take into account because they are affecting and changing completely the market. Investments in clean energy create 3.5 times the number of jobs at the same size investment in fossil fuels. To give you a concrete example, in South Africa, thanks to the Renewable Energy Independent Power Product Procurement Program, the REIPP, direct employment rose from 70,800 jobs in 2014 to almost 46,000 by mid-2019, before the COVID. Larger and targeted investment flows in the renewable electricity sector are therefore necessary all across Africa to address the reliability of electricity supply and to make progress on access to power and uptake. But at the same time, a new working model for collaboration should allow both the public and the private sector to play an appropriate role in delivering the new infrastructure while allocating risks and ensuring commercial returns to be generated. This is exactly what the shared value is always talking about, the ecosystem perspective, taking into account at local level what is available to co-create projects and ideas and develop business model opportunities, taking account the public sector, the private sector, universities, NGOs, new social entrepreneurs, startups, what is available on field to foster a socio-economic development. But let me also introduce something which is, I won't say brand new, but quite relevant in the discussion of the just transition. Because this is what we are talking about. We are not talking about an energy transition only. We need and we must do it just, equal, and as fair as possible. And to this extent, we need now not only to consider the generation of energy, but also to take into account the infrastructure, meaning that the grid is the enabler and the facilitator of this just transition. In fact, it is important to underline how the increase of the hosting capacity and the access to electricity in Africa will also require the improvement of the quality of service and the empowerment of the grid infrastructure. Sub-Saharan Africa, limited and aged power infrastructure poses significant challenges to achieve universal access to energy and successfully incorporating increasing amounts of intermittent renewable energies. Although private sector participation now in Africa is growing, in electricity generation most of all, it remains very marginal in transmission and distribution. Therefore, private participation must increase significantly to contribute to the large-scale investments necessary to address the challenges of growing urbanization and the post-COVID recovery in the next decade. A recent study published in 2020, so last year, reports that at global scale, infrastructure has a socioeconomic rate of return around 20%. In other words, $1 of infrastructure investments can raise the GDP by 20 cents in the long run. So if you add this part to the other part of the generation, we are really talking about a lot of new opportunities. Last but not least, let me add the importance and mention the importance of the circular economy. Circular economy is the real potential just to foster also new business model. It is important, is a tool, which is a tool to create shared value. It's an extraordinary opportunity. First of all, because we are not talking about waste only, but it's a way also to reconsider the end of life of materials. That's relevant because if we consider the end of life of material, we can really start with new business models at local level, very effective, that can bring a lot of new job opportunities. I participated to the Africa Shared Value in the last sessions, in the last year. I had the opportunity to listen to amazing good ideas coming from young entrepreneurs there, and they will make the difference. Again, as said at the beginning of this day, a lot can be done if we put together the private and the public sector. They have different view in terms of long run, let's say, and short run. We need to match and find a way to work better together. That's why civil society can act as a bridge among these two partners. And then the academies, the schools, education, and skills, new competencies coming from all these opportunities will reshape the future of Africa that really, in my heart, I really believe will be to go straight to electrification. That's the most important thing to deal with a just energy transition.
Thank you very much, Maria Cristina, for this very insightful talk. I think renewable energy is also a passion of mine because this is pretty much what I do on a day-to-day basis. But when people talk of a just transition, I'm always fearful of who gets left behind and who moves ahead, right? I mean, if you look at Africa, for example, we all need baseload. So in Zimbabwe, for example, we'd like to move to solar, to renewables, but we only have so many rivers and dams. So where do we import this power from? If you're in South Africa, you do have probably a good 10 gigawatts worth of solar, but that's buttressed against 10 gigawatts of coal. Who invests in this just transition? We always get the, I mean, we look at COP26, what's happening, the announcement between South Africa and is it Britain or is it the States in investment into a just transition? But my question is always, can't we get our own asset managers, banks, provident funds, investors to invest locally in our own renewable energy sources from the community, from a community-based level upwards? So you're looking in farming communities for agriculture, small manufacturing for SMEs, right up until the big users, i.e. the mines, the cement manufacturing companies. Because as long as as long as we don't do this, we will always have new ideas, but the fundamental question that remains is who's going to pay or invest in this just transition? And when they invest in this just transition, at what cost does the money come in at? And what does that mean in terms of the tariff to the final user who needs to justify why he should utilize solar as opposed to chopping down firewood, for argument's sake? And then, of course, you've got the issue of the transmission lines as well. The fact that different transmission lines, there's no set standard or set level in transmission lines across Africa. So when we generate this renewable energy or you generate the sustainable energy, how do we transmit it across borders? At what tariff is it transmitted at? Do we have a regional average of the electricity cost that we should all abide by? Is it a cost of who can afford the highest tariff, which means if it's Cabora Bassa, even though that's the cheapest power in the region, are they tempted to direct their power to Angola as opposed to Zambia, because probably Angola can afford a higher tariff? So I think these questions in terms of a just transition are also, we should also look at a fair and equitable transition to sustainable energy moving forward as well. I think also my final note is what then do we do in a continent that is so fixated on coal? So in my country, we've got coal reserves that last us 834 years. How do we then justify why we should cease using these coal resources and move towards hydro, which we know we've got a limited resource? Solar works during the day. Battery, no one really knows what's what. Do we go to nuclear? What exactly then forms the base load at which is going to anchor our solar moving forward? I don't know, food for thought, Dr. Mumbi?
Thank you, Simba. Excellent points. And I think, as Maria said, that is the paradox. Because it's really, and I have it all the time, you know, when teaching and talking about this, because the question is really about development. We talk about economic development in Africa a lot. And then the thing is, there are these challenges, the broader level challenges, climate change, challenges in society. So when it comes to energy, how are we supposed to resolve it? How do we actually justify this? And I think that's the challenge for us today. Another thing I also wanted to just perhaps reflect a bit on, and it's on Enel, because having read a bit about it, is they have actually shown, you know, the business case. They've demonstrated that well. So you find that the challenge when it comes to shared value measurement is how you tie the impact to the economic metrics. And what they have done together with Professor Mark Kramer is they've actually there's this new report on hybrid metrics, which shows Enel as another case study. And you see that, the more you reduce your carbon intensity, it actually does increase your earnings over time. And I think it is these kind of conversations that we need to have, that yes, it may look profitable now or less costly now to be non-renewable, but moving forward, these costs will dramatically go up. Also, I know, again, I'd just like to thank Maria. I will definitely be inviting you as a guest to one class. I really appreciate that. And thank you very much for sharing your journey and points of reflection for us around energy and circular business models. So I see people are getting hungry. So we are approaching that time. I'd just like to say that please continue to tweet, especially for the people who are joining us online. Remember, the tag is @AfricaSVS, and the hashtag is #ASVLS21. That is @AfricaSVS, #ASVLS21. The last thing I would like to also point out, now that we are talking about shared value measurement and impact, is that the Shared Value Africa initiative actually has its very first impact report. So congratulations, Tiki and team. I think that's a really, really impressive task. Well done. It is very difficult to measure your impact well. So we're looking forward to reading that. It is available online. We will be sharing the links to that. So without further ado, I would like to announce a break, a lunch break, up until that would be 2 p.m. South African time. So for the guests here, you will be able to access the lunch area outside, and let us come back re-energized to continue the second part of the session, which will focus on our agile entrepreneurs. Thank you very much, and see you all soon.